My name is Marian Elwood, and I was 62 years old when all of this happened. At that age, I thought I had already experienced all the major twists life had to offer. Marriage, motherhood, loss, and the quiet settling of a life lived responsibly. But the truth is that sometimes the most unexpected battles begin after the age when people assume you're too tired to fight. I lived in a modest brick house in the suburbs of Dayton, Ohio, the kind of place where maple trees cast long shadows across the street in the early evening, and neighbors waved almost out of obligation. My days were simple: morning walks, part-time bookkeeping at a local dental office, and long phone calls with my daughter, who lived 2 states away. For years, my relationship with my younger sister, Linda, had been manageable. That's a generous word. In reality, she'd always been the kind of person who wanted more attention, more help, more sympathy, more financial support. I loved her, of course. Sisters fight, sisters forgive. That was the rhythm of our lives. But after our mother passed away, I sensed something shifting. Something cold settling beneath Linda's polite phone calls and overly sweet condolences. At the funeral reception, she barely looked at me. She spent most of her time hovering around the attorney who handled our mother's estate, smiling like she was auditioning for a role. At the time, I assumed grief was making us both strange. I didn't know it was only the first tremor before the real quake. Our mother, practical and organized, had left behind a small inheritance. Her house, some savings, and several pieces of land in rural Ohio that had been in our family for 3 generations. Nothing extravagant, just the product of decades of careful living. Mom always told us, "Whatever I have, you girls will share equally." I believed her. I trusted that. About a week after the funeral, I felt a pinprick of unease, something instinctive, like sensing a storm before the pressure drops. Linda had been oddly quiet. Too quiet. And when she finally called, her voice was strangely cheerful, like someone rehearsing optimism. "Marian," she said, "we need to talk about Mom's estate." And that was the moment, the tiniest flicker, when I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't yet know how deep the betrayal would run, or how calmly, quietly, and thoroughly I would have to dismantle it. The storm was coming. I could feel it in my bones. And I knew, from a lifetime of dealing with my sister's schemes, that this time I would need more than patience. I would need proof. I would need discipline. And I would need to be willing to confront a truth I had spent years avoiding. That sometimes family wounds don't heal unless you clean them out to the root. This is the story of how my sister tried to take everything that wasn't hers. And how I sent her a single piece of paper, a tax notice, that brought her entire plan crashing down. But that comes later, because the betrayal began with a sentence I can still hear perfectly, spoken with the breezy entitlement only my sister could muster. "You don't need an inheritance, Marian. You have a job." And in that moment, something inside me went still. Very, very still. It was a Thursday evening when Linda delivered that sentence, sitting across from me at our mother's dining table. The table where we'd once argued over chores, traced math homework, and blown out birthday candles. Now it felt cold and unfamiliar, like everything else she'd touched after Mom died. She pushed a stack of documents toward me. I noticed her handwriting on the sticky notes attached to them. Neat, eager, full of direction. "I already handled most of the probate stuff," she said lightly. "And I talked to Mr. Caldwell, the estate attorney. It turns out Mom had more debt than we realized, but don't worry, I'm sorting it out." I frowned. Mom didn't have debt. She'd paid off her mortgage 15 years before. She used cash for almost everything. She kept records, voluminous records. The woman saved receipts from grocery trips dated back to 1998. "What debt?" I asked. Linda sighed dramatically, as if I were the difficult one. "It's complicated. Really complicated. But since you're still working, and I'm not, I figured it made the most sense for me to take on the responsibility of managing everything." Her tone was breezy, a performance, a calculated lightness that tried to sound responsible but came off as rehearsed. "And the inheritance?" I asked. She blinked, pretending confusion so poorly it was almost insulting. "What about it?" Mom wanted everything split equally. Linda smiled, and it was a smile I had seen before, during childhood Monopoly games, in teenage arguments, in adulthood when she borrowed money she never repaid. It was the smile of someone who believed they were about to get away with something. "Well," she said, swirling her coffee, "equal is such a subjective concept. I mean, you make decent money. You have retirement savings. You don't need the property or the accounts. And honestly, I'm emotionally fragile right now. She touched her forehead as if that confirmed it. So it just makes sense for me to inherit the house. And the land. And the savings. For stability. I stared at her. Linda, equal is not subjective. It's equal. She waved a dismissive hand. Oh, come on. You have a job. You don't need an inheritance. The words hung between us like a slap. I didn't react. Not outwardly. Instead, I watched her closely, the way you watch someone rewiring a bomb incorrectly, aware it will eventually blow but unsure when. What exactly have you done with the estate paperwork? I asked. She leaned back in her chair. Well, Mom signed a few amendments before she passed. Nothing major. Just enough to clarify her intentions. And she appointed me as sole executor. My heart kicked hard once. Amendments? When? A while ago, she said vaguely. Weeks before the end. But I'd been with Mom almost every day during those last weeks. Linda came only intermittently, swept in with dramatics, then disappeared again. Mom would never have changed her will without telling me. May I see the papers? I asked. Her smile hardened. You don't need to. I've got it handled. It was the first time in my life I fully understood what people meant when they described a slow burn of anger. It wasn't hot. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, contained, deliberate, like a furnace turning on in a well-insulated house. I stood up, gathered my purse, and said I would be reviewing everything myself. Linda didn't like that. Her voice turned sharp, revealing the steel beneath the sugary surface. Marion, don't make this complicated. You always have to control everything. Just let it go. I walked out without responding. But that night, alone in my house, I sat at my dining table with a cup of chamomile tea and stared at the wall for a long time. Linda was lying. That much was clear. But I had no idea yet just how bold the lie was, or how many people she had already manipulated. And I had no idea that one government envelope months later would unravel her entire scheme. To understand why my sister did what she did, you'd need to understand the decades of imbalance woven into our relationship. Linda was 5 years younger than me, and from the moment she could speak, she demanded more of everything. More attention, more affection, more rescue. She had an uncanny ability to mold herself into whatever role made people pity her the most. When we were children, it meant she claimed mysterious stomachaches right before chores. As teenagers, she cultivated a fragile persona that required constant emotional scaffolding. She floated through adulthood as though she were allergic to accountability. Our mother, bless her heart, never quite knew how to handle Linda's talent for victimhood. She tried to give her the gentle love she thought Linda needed. Meanwhile, I became the responsible one, the steady one, the fixer. I didn't resent that. Not then. But as we grew older, Linda's patterns sharpened. She married quickly and disastrously, divorced twice, and lived on a carousel of unstable jobs. Each time things collapsed, she called me crying, describing injustices that, shockingly, always happened to her, never by her. I learned to offer emotional support but stopped offering money years ago. Not because I was cold, but because enabling her was a form of harm. She needed boundaries. But Linda never handled boundaries well. Especially mine. And as Mom aged, Linda's visits became strategic. She showed up with flowers and syrupy sweetness only when she needed something. Mom saw through it, but still tried to keep peace. Linda had always been the fragile one, after all. During Mom's last year, Linda's behavior grew more erratic. She hinted at feeling overwhelmed, complained about her finances, and made dark comments about not being appreciated enough. Mom told me once, quietly, "Your sister is desperate, Marion. And desperate people do foolish things." I didn't think Mom meant it literally. But after Mom died, and Linda's inheritance ambitions surfaced like oil on water, I realized Mom had understood her younger daughter all too well. Linda wasn't grieving. She was seizing an opportunity. And she believed, truly believed, that she deserved everything because she had suffered more in life. The irony was that Mom had left clear instructions. The estate was to be split 50-50. Not because of money, but because she wanted fairness. She didn't want us fighting. Now we were on a collision course precisely because Linda couldn't accept fairness. In her worldview, fairness was an insult. But what Linda didn't anticipate was that I wasn't the passive older sister anymore. I wasn't tired or intimidated or willing to swallow lies for the sake of peace. When she said, "You don't need an inheritance, Marion, you have a job," she revealed more than she intended. She showed her motive. And once motive was clear, everything else would be easy to uncover. All I needed was patience. And documentation. A lot of documentation. I began quietly. The first thing I did was request all estate-related filings from the probate court. It took 48 hours for the clerk to email me digital copies. What I saw made my stomach tighten. Linda had filed amendments, 3 of them. Each one purported to show our mother's signature, and each one conveniently transferred property and executor rights solely to Linda. But the signatures were wrong. Close but wrong. Mom's cursive had a distinctive right-tilted loop on her M. The documents Linda filed had left-leaning loops, as if someone had tried to draw them from memory. I printed everything, placed it in a binder, and started a timeline. Next, I called the estate attorney, Mr. Caldwell. A tired-sounding receptionist told me he'd retired 3 months prior, something Linda clearly hadn't expected me to discover. His replacement, a younger, sharper attorney named Dana Kessler, returned my call later that afternoon. Dana had already sensed something was off. "Your sister has been instructive," she said diplomatically. "But certain things about the filings seemed inconsistent. I haven't signed off on anything yet." I felt a quiet surge of gratitude. "Can we meet?" "Absolutely." When we sat down together in her office, bright, modern, methodical, she laid everything out. She showed me metadata on digital scans that didn't match the dates Linda claimed. She pointed out discrepancies in signatures and dates that suggested someone tampered with documents. Then she leaned back and said the words that shaped everything that followed. "Your sister may have committed inheritance fraud." I didn't flinch. I just nodded once. From there, I went deeper. I reviewed Mom's financial records, which she kept meticulously. There was no debt. Not a dollar. Linda had lied. I checked property records. The family land had increased in value dramatically over the past 10 years. Linda probably knew. She spent hours each day scrolling real estate sites. I contacted Mom's primary physician, who confirmed that during her final weeks, Mom's cognitive clarity was stable and documented. There were no sudden changes that would justify amending a will. Then I made one final call. The county auditor's office. I asked whether any transfer of property had been attempted recently. The woman on the phone said, "Yes. There's a pending transfer request for your mother's land to be reassigned solely to a Linda Henderson." I closed my eyes briefly. "And," the woman added, "because it's agricultural property, she'll be receiving a tax reassessment notice soon." That sentence was a key turning in a lock. "A reassessment notice?" I asked. "Yes. It reflects the actual taxable value of the land. It's substantial." "How substantial?" She gave me the number. It was large enough to make anyone's stomach drop, especially someone who had no job, no savings, and a long-standing aversion to responsibility. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence. I hadn't planned revenge, but the truth, safe, legal, factual, was about to do the work for me. All I needed to do was let Linda step fully into her own trap and wait for the envelope. About 3 weeks later, the envelope arrived. A thick, official document from the county auditor, addressed to my mother's estate and forwarded to Linda's home address. But before it reached her mailbox, the postal worker, who'd known our family for years, called me. "Marion," she said, "you might want to come pick this up. It looks important." I drove down to the small post office, signed for the redirected mail, and held the envelope in my hands. It was heavy with consequences. Inside was the reassessment notice, the tax bill Linda would owe if she took the land solely under her name. The amount was staggering, not because the land was luxurious, but because it carried decades of agricultural tax deferments that only applied if the property remained shared and used in specific ways. Alone, Linda couldn't maintain them. Alone, she would be hit with thousands in back taxes and reclassification fees. The kind of money she didn't have, couldn't borrow, and would never be able to negotiate her way out of. I made a copy. Then I placed the original in an envelope and drove to Linda's house. Her place was a cluttered ranch-style home that constantly smelled of scented candles and unresolved panic. She opened the door with a look of annoyance. "What now?" "This came for you," I said calmly. She snatched the envelope, ripped it open, and began reading. At first, her expression was smug, until her eyes hit the numbers. Then her face drained of color. What is this?" she whispered. "A tax reassessment," I said, stepping past her into the foyer. "Because you attempted to transfer agricultural land into your sole name, without legal standing, and without notifying me, which is illegal." She blinked, shaking her head like a child refusing to hear bad news. No, this isn't right." Why would I owe this much? This is thousands. This is impossible. It's the law, I said quietly. She sank onto her couch. You knew. You knew this was coming. Yes, I said. She stared at me, betrayal and fear twisting together. Why didn't you warn me? Because, I said evenly, I wanted the truth to speak for itself. You tried to take everything. You lied to me. You forged documents. You tried to cheat the system. This, I gestured to the tax notice, is the real cost of your choices. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I could almost see the wheels turning as she realized the enormity of what she'd done, and how little control she had now. But the unraveling wasn't over. Not yet. I sat across from Linda at her own kitchen table, the same relationship battlefield we'd used for decades. But this time, I wasn't the older sister trying to keep the peace. I was the executor of consequence. Marion, she said, her voice desperate, this is insane. I didn't do anything wrong. I needed stability. You don't understand how hard my life has been. I do understand, I said softly. But your struggles don't entitle you to steal. They don't justify fraud. Her eyes widened. Fraud? Oh, come on. You're exaggerating. I slid the binder I'd brought onto the table. These are the documents you filed. These are the discrepancies. These are the dates that don't align. And this is a letter from the attorney confirming forged amendments are criminal offenses. She recoiled. You wouldn't, Marion. You wouldn't turn me in. I'm your sister. For the past month, I said, you've acted like I'm your obstacle, not your family. But I'm giving you something better than punishment. She frowned, confused. An out, I said. What out? You withdraw every fraudulent filing. You acknowledge the original will. You stop trying to seize what doesn't belong to you. And we split everything exactly as Mom intended. She looked down at the tax bill. And if I don't, then the county will pursue the back taxes. The court will investigate the forged amendments. And you'll face legal consequences I won't shield you from. Her jaw trembled. You'd let them arrest me? I met her eyes steadily. I'm done covering for you. For the first time in our lives, she seemed to understand I meant it. Her shoulders collapsed inward. Fine, she whispered. Fine. I'll sign whatever you want. No, I said calmly. You'll sign what Mom wanted. I placed the legitimate estate documents in front of her. She signed slowly, hands shaking. When it was done, she looked up at me with a strange mix of resentment and relief. I can't believe you would do this to me, she muttered. I didn't do anything to you, I said. This is what you did to yourself. And for the first time, she didn't have a comeback. Within 2 weeks, every fraudulent filing had been formally withdrawn. The court accepted the original will. The property was restored under joint ownership until the estate could be settled equally. The tax reassessment evaporated once Linda canceled the transfer, leaving her with no financial penalty, only humiliation. But consequences come in more forms than numbers. Linda had to sit with the reality that her attempt to manipulate the system had been exposed. She had to face the estate attorney's stern warnings about criminal liability. She had to endure the awkward silence of relatives who slowly learned the truth. And she had to accept that Mom's wishes, not hers, would prevail. As for me, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, grounded, true to myself and to my mother. The land was sold at fair market value. The house went next. The savings were divided according to the will. Linda received exactly half, no more, no less. Yet she stayed strangely quiet afterward. No thank you, no apology, no acknowledgement. Just silence wrapped in wounded pride. But that was fine. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply the restoration of what should have been all along. As the estate closed, Dana, the attorney, shook my hand and said, "You handled this with remarkable composure." I smiled slightly. You learn to be calm when you grow up with someone like Linda. But it wasn't just calm. It was clarity. For the first time, I wasn't the older sister cleaning up the mess. I was the woman my mother raised me to be, ethical, patient, and unafraid to stand firm. I think about my mother often, her quiet strength, her meticulous organization, her deep desire for fairness between her daughters. She would have been saddened by what Linda attempted, but she would have been proud of how it ended. With truth, not vengeance. With boundaries, not cruelty. People assume revenge is about hurting someone back. But to me, ethical revenge is simply the restoration of balance. Done calmly, factually, and without malice. Linda learned a hard lesson. Not through screaming or fighting, but through documentation, law, and consequences she created for herself. And I learned something too. I learned that protecting family doesn't mean accepting their harm. I learned that kindness without boundaries becomes fuel for manipulation. And I learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop shielding someone from the truth. In the end, the tax notice didn't just expose Linda's lies. It revealed who we had both become. And it showed me that standing up for yourself, even later in life, is an act of dignity. To those listening, I'll leave you with this question. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted believed they were entitled to what you earned, built, or inherited? And how did you reclaim your voice in the situation? I'd love to hear your thoughts.